Hey, that sound you hear is the playoffs creeping up on us. We are in April. It is time to get down to brass tacks. Welcome to the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University. WilmU Works. Our guy Noah Levick, along with Ben Berry here, and I'm Danny Pommells. You know the deal. Let's dive into this, Noah. A couple games have been decided, and we're not on a losing streak anymore. So. I say we, meaning the Sixers. We're a group here. Sixers Talk Podcast, the team. We're all synonymous, homogenous. We are one. Interesting things going on. We've got Joel Embiid in the thick of this MVP race, Noah, with a statement against the Cleveland Cavaliers. We got JB Bickerstaff and Ben Simmons complaining. We got Joel Embiid possibly closing in on this scoring title, a chance at it at the very least. And somewhere in all of this, James Harden continues to shoot poorly from the field, but dishes out assists at an all-time rate. So help us make sense of all this, Noah. So much going on. Let's talk about the good and Joel Embiid. JB Bickerstaff complaining because Joel Embiid was dominating. I mean, that's the way I look at it. He's trying to make it seem like, the free throw line and the fouls that were called in the favor of the Sixers weren't justified, and you can't defend the free throw line. But it is what it is. We've seen this all season, and good players get fouled, right, Noah? And it's been a part of the game for as long as we can remember. So just what a great performance, though. One the Sixers needed to get this W against Cleveland.
Absolutely. Those comments by Ty Lue were perhaps taken somewhat out of context with JB Bickerstaff. Not at all. He began his post-game press conference irate at the officiating and made it clear that that was the case. He left no gray area. I can understand the frustration because he's got a young team, shorthanded team, without some of its best players, and all-star center Jared Allen and rookie of the year contender Evan Mobley. But these guys draw free throws because they're very good for the most part. And the Cavs were in a great position to win this game. They went up 12 points in the second quarter, and the Sixers only trailed at halftime despite abysmal shooting from the field, largely because Harden and Embiid just recognized, okay, nothing else is working, so we're going to draw some free throws. And that's not uncommon, and I'm sure it's incredibly irritating to be on the other side of that. But this is how it is, and I understand the opposing side of it, but I also think, the bottom line is these guys are better than anyone else in the league at it, and you just kind of have to live with that if you're the other team and do your best to avoid that being the reason you lose the game. So, that was fascinating, though, to see. Just no hiding the emotions there. He let everyone know, and curious, what the league will make of that. We shall see what the next day reaction is to those comments.
What is also fascinating is this guy Joel Embiid goes from being questionable coming into the game to 44, 17, and 5 blocks, making an obvious case for why he is the MVP. And I think the defense is really what sets them apart in some aspects. We had Giannis have these incredible performances against the Brooklyn Nets and against the Sixers on national TV, which definitely bolstered his MVP status. But here on the second half of a back-to-back, the Sixers erased this losing streak and build a winning streak with 2 in a row, coming in here with 5 games left in the season. You got to think, though, with the way that Joel Embiid has endured throughout the season, there is some rest coming up here with these a lighter slate here and, a back-to-back still to come with 5 games left in the season. It's got to be some rest mixed in here for him, right?
You would think so. And the idea of in-game rest, the Sixers actually pulled it off
against Charlotte.
The Hornets, because they blew them out by 30 points, but in games that are competitive, if you want to win the game, it's looking like you've got to play Joel Embiid at least 38 to 40 minutes because the minutes without him are inevitably quite shaky. It's interesting because, of course, the seeding situation is still quite tight. The Sixers, are going to be a top 4 seed in all likelihood, but it's just a question.
And they have clinched a playoff berth officially.
Officially clinched the playoffs, last night, which is not nothing. Probably, should be appreciated. It's their first run of 5 playoff appearances in a row since the Larry Brown, Allen Iverson era. So it's been quite a while. But absolutely, as we've said before, you need to do everything within your power to make sure your 2 stars are in the best possible place health-wise heading into the postseason. And honestly, with no disrespect to Pacers and the Pistons, just beat the Sixers, but these are teams that honestly you shouldn't need a full strength roster to beat. But there could be some interesting decisions here down the line for sure when it comes to seeding possibly being at stake, and then also not loving the idea of James Harden and Joel Embiid continuing to play 38 to 40 minutes every night. But yeah, my personal expectation is that we don't see both those guys go at least 40 minutes in all of the final 4 games.
And I'm just, Noah, just a personal revealing of my inner thoughts and feelings. I'm learning to become comfortable with the incremental baby steps that it seems like they make from game to game, because looking for this team to take leaps forward, or for Doc to change some of his philosophies, or I was thinking about there was a point in the Cleveland game where I was talking to one of our producers, Mike Mulhern, and he asked me if I felt like Doc would foul the Cavs with the Sixers up 3, so to avoid, send them to the line and avoid them possibly tying the game with a 3-point shot. And I don't even think Doc really subscribes to maybe some of those new school, quote unquote, ideas about basketball. Just what I think of him and thinking about how he coaches, I don't, but I'm learning to be satisfied. You only got 5 games left in the regular season. This is a team, obviously that made a blockbuster trade and bringing in James Harden. They're trying to figure things out, the DeAndre Jordan minutes and the bench and who plays and who doesn't. We've seen Furkan Korkmaz get back in the rotation in some aspects. Shake Milton kind of pushed to the forefront. So I'm just learning to be satisfied with what they are as far as making the progress that they've made. I really thought that beautiful third quarter of offensive eruption against the Hornets kind of masked or perfumed over some of their issues that continue to show up, like the turnovers or the transition defense. But some of that stuff is really just based on will and desire, and the fact that you're going to get back and hustle on defense and run as opposed to jog, or take care of the basketball and make the smart play instead of the risky play. So I feel like some of those things, basketball IQ-wise, can kind of develop on their own if they continue to work on them and push to get better. So that's kind of where I am. I want to ramble, and I know you have some things to say, but that's kind of where I am.
Makes sense to me. Yeah, I think this team is reminiscent of the 2018-19 group, in that it's really up and down, and you see glimpses of when they're at their peak level. There's an air of invincibility, and they're awesome to watch. Watching the performance against the Hornets, the season high 144 points, 21 3-pointers, I was reminded of a fun moment from that team. I believe it was after they beat Toronto decisively in Game 6 at home, and Mike Scott said, when we move the ball like we did tonight, ain't nobody effing with us. Like when they're playing as a team and everything's clicking, it just doesn't seem like there's much other teams can do to stop them, right? And we got that impression early in the James Harden era with the 5-0 start and 125 plus points every game. But clearly the consistency is lacking, and that's not yet regular for the team. But it is wild. You can score 94 points against a cellar-dwelling team in the Pistons, and then 50 more the next night against a team that's not a defensive juggernaut, but will be a play-in tournament squad in the Charlotte Hornets. So A lot of variability, a lot of ups and downs. To your point about Doc Rivers and the rotations continuing to fluctuate. Last night was an interesting one because Tyrese Maxey got into foul trouble late in the first quarter, and Rivers went the route of sitting him the entire rest of the half, which I think was debatable. The thing I actually found a little more curious was Matisse Thybulle didn't play at all in the second quarter until there was about a minute left. So perhaps that was a case of just trying to give Shake Milton some more run and trying to develop some more comfort with some of those other bench guys like George Niang and Danny Green and Milton. But I thought Thybulle started the game very much checking that box that Rivers has mentioned of being a dynamic defender, then didn't appear in the second quarter. But to Matisse Thybulle's credit, he stayed ready, stayed mentally engaged in the game, and made the game-sealing play down the stretch. One of these, only Matisse Thybulle can do that sort of plays where he jumps an inbounds pass intended for Darius Garland, and then as he's falling down, throws the ball ahead to Tobias Harris, and the Sixers get a satisfying win, thanks in part to Thybulle. But there are a lot of pieces on this team where you don't know exactly what you're going to get night after night, and I think Joel Embiid is the one exception to that, and that's probably a nice summation of why he's got a good MVP case. The Sixers are where they are because of him, and I think it was appropriate that they clinched a playoff spot with him being brilliant on both ends of the floor, and I think also just being really gritty and tough that game. Both, had a little, again, injury scare with the right ankle late in the fourth quarter. But his mentality as well, of finishing tough and one layups and just kind of willing them back in that game, despite not a lot of other things going right besides his performance. Of course, it's laudable, and it is MVP contender worthy, no doubt.
Embiid with his 11th 40-10 game of the season, and ESPN Stats and Info doing some research for us. Embiid with his 11th 40-10 game, as I mentioned, the only players with more in a season, Russell Westbrook, Moses Malone, had a dozen, and they both won MVP that year. So not saying that the numbers are what translate specifically. Obviously, these voters and their opinions factor into this. And, it's just for me, when I just to touch on the MVP stuff, whatever credit you give Jokic seems to apply to Joel as well, meaning that if you're giving Jokic credit for being able to help the Nuggets succeed without Jamal Murray, well, Joel did that without Ben Simmons. And if you're looking at, Jokic's passing as like some prowess and a reason why his assist numbers are why he deserves MVP, well, what about Joel Embiid's defense and his blocks and, those aspects of his game as a rim protector, which Jokic doesn't have that same prowess. And obviously Joel is, I think, 0.1 percentage points behind LeBron James for the scoring title. So that gives Joel Embiid maybe a leg up in that aspect. So I feel like it'll be Joel's title. I think if he wins the scoring title, Joel's MVP award, the award will be his. If he wins the scoring title, that'll be icing on the cake. Obviously, we won't find this stuff out until later in the summer, unfortunately. But right now, he's the guy I think should win it. Are you on that same page, just to get your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm continuing to hold out, making a decisive call here. Honestly, as I've said before, I think like both guys would legitimately be deserving of that award. As far as like trying to read exactly what would happen, we did have the MVP straw poll from ESPN's Tim Bontemps as of a couple weeks ago that showed Jokic probably had taken an edge. I had always thought that it's a lot harder to make the case for Jokic if Denver falls to a play-in spot. It just seems odd, the idea of an MVP coming from a team that's not even in a conventional playoff place. But, of course, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. He led them to a victory yesterday over the Lakers, and it looks like at a minimum they're going to be a top 6 seed. And I think he's got a lot of good reasons to potentially repeat as the award I personally won't feel that either guy is snubbed if, the other wins the award. That's just where I'm at right now. And I am honestly glad that I don't have to make the decision, because I think it's a tough decision. But absolutely, Joel Embiid could not be doing much better as far as showing people that he's deserving of MVP. And, it means a lot to him, this award. He's always talked about Defensive Player of the Year being what's most important to him, and doesn't look like he's going to get that this year. But I think MVP also, of course, is super meaningful, and hear him reflect on where he came from, and that he hasn't been playing basketball that long, and it will be a huge deal, of course, in the first in this city since Allen Iverson. I'm just not convinced it is going to happen based on the way it seems voters are leaning, but there's a little time left, and he can build his case a little further. Doc Rivers told a cool story about how he sort of floated the idea to Embiid of basically padding his stats a little bit, and Embiid, was very much against that. He said, I want the numbers to basically come to me within the course of the game. I'm not concerned.
The organic aspect of it. He wants it just to come naturally. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, to use a Brett Brown little term there. But yeah, he doesn't want to be fixated on MVP. He's all about the team success. And of course, that's admirable. And that's the kind of thing that an MVP would say.
And then a game after Rivers proposes the idea of him going for 50, he approaches those numbers in the flow of the game against the Cavaliers with this incredible performance where he approaches, 20 rebounds to go with those 44 points. So, I feel like he's the guy, straw polls and whatnot definitely tell a story. But I think that, you made the point about how, the Nuggets were in the standings. If you, before the season, asked, where you thought the Nuggets might fall in the Western Conference, you probably would have said like 5th or 6th or somewhere around there. The Sixers, though, without Ben Simmons, you might not have said that. You probably wouldn't have expected them to be, scratching and clawing to get to the number 1 spot, or have held the number 1 spot, however briefly in the beginning of season or midway through the season or what have you. But it's just, to me, I feel like, Joel gets the edge because of his well-roundedness. And, you look at, Harden still not quite what you would want from him consistency wise, but that doesn't, affect anything that Joel is doing. He's still undaunted. And to kind of touch on Harden here, he has the triple double, but the shooting percentage numbers are really down. I got him at 8 for 23 in the last 2, 10 for 32 from 3-point range in his last 4. Are you concerned at all with the shooting as it goes opposite the assist numbers? Like, are you satisfied and happy with the playmaking as opposed to his consistency, shooting the basketball? Do you take one over the other because you just have to be happy with it and deal with it?
I think if the Sixers are going to win a championship, he's probably got to be doing both at a high level. He was asked after the game about the shooting and whether anything's wrong mechanically. He said it's just about sticking the landing and being in a better place at the top of his shot, just as far as the alignment. But he said it's pretty simple, and he didn't seem concerned or think it's unfixable. And he's got a track record of, being a pretty good shooter, of course. And, you figure he's going to wipe out some of these poor nights from the floor. But then again, this was similar to where he was at with the Nets, leading into, when he was traded to the Sixers. So it's not a tiny sample size where he hasn't been shooting the ball great. But I think at least last night he drew a bunch of free throws and put up his second triple-double as a Sixer, and obviously contributed to the win in a lot of meaningful ways. Even that defensive rebound he got after Embiid challenged Garland at the rim. And, that's not a stat padding rebound just to reach the triple-double. That's a big-time rebound by James Harden. And he definitely helped the Sixers in that regard. And I thought overall played well against Charlotte too. The Sixers picked apart that defense in a big way, and he was obviously in the middle of all of that. And you just see opponents who are not equipped to vary the pick and roll coverage and have to lean a lot on drop coverage. It just seems like a recipe for disaster. You felt sorry for the 22-year-old Moses Brown last night, who was forced to start with the Cavs' first choice guys out and just not equipped to handle a rolling Joel Embiid. I don't think many are. And you see James Harden is as precise as it gets with those in rhythm pocket passes and the variations of the pace, and just putting Joel Embiid in the perfect spots for him to succeed and pressure a defense. So I think all of that is encouraging, and you're reminded that it was there to a high degree before this little stretch where opponents were switching the pick and roll and the Sixers didn't handle it especially well. But no doubt, like, he can't have 3 bad shooting games in a playoff series against a good team and get away with it, most likely, from the Sixers' perspective. So hopefully on their end, he figures the mechanical tweak out and just becomes a little more consistent and a little better and a little more like what he's been for his career as a shooter.
A lot of times with these teams who are, evenly matched or close to each other, it really comes down to making shots. And one team doesn't make open shots or misses shots they normally make. The other team, vice versa, they make shots that they normally might miss or are in rhythm more than the other team. And I think the thing for me is I can live and die with whatever Harden that we get, because this was the trade that they made. Ben Simmons isn't even playing, still talking and citing lower back issues as to why he's not on the court, as well as his mental health stuff. So this was the trade that the Sixers were going to need to make to get over the hump. So I'm going to live and die with whatever James Harden I get. I just want him to be decisive. I just want him to be aggressive, whether it be passing the basketball and, smart plays as well as shooting the basketball. We've seen him not at his best in playoff situations and meltdown in game 7s and things like that. But the indecisive James Harden is probably makes me more uncomfortable than the guy who's like going all out and missing shots or turning the ball over. Because it's like, you're trying to get inside his head as to why, he's not taking a jumper and backs it out at a time where he was open. Or there's other times when he tries to force passes, in the Embiid or what have you, instead of shooting the basketball. So it's like he's just not making the right choice at that time, and it leads to a turnover. And then all of a sudden that turns into the Sixers not getting back quickly enough on transition defense or getting beat down the floor, and there's points on the other end. So I think I just want him to be decisive regardless of how it plays out. Just be aggressive and trying to make the right basketball play rather than second guessing himself. So that's probably where I am.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think he's on the same page. I think that's his goal as well. And I think, honestly, he was pretty good overall on that front over the weekend. And, of course, if the wide open shots are falling, the numbers are better and perhaps there's less consternation about where he's at. I mean, there were, to me, a play that stood out from last night's game, just the Cavs totally botched something defensively, and he had a good 3-4 seconds to stare down a 3. And he did take it and just went in and out. It's like, all right, well, wide open James Harden 3. He needs to take that shot, and hopefully it goes in the playoffs. Last night was one of those games where it felt very make or miss league. That phrase came to mind. Sixers were outscored by 11 points with the DeAndre Jordan first half minutes. And then it was only -1 in the second half because the Cavs missed, I believe, 3 very wide open 3-pointers because Jordan doesn't really stray from the paint very much and can't do so very effectively.
And why you don't want to see the Raptors in the first round, because if these bigs aren't getting up to the 3-point line, this smaller Raptors lineup is going to eviscerate them, right?
Well, if Chris Boucher is Chris Boucher versus the Sixers, the player that he's normally been against them, then yeah, that would be a problem. So yeah, I think Jordan actually had his best game as a Sixer against Charlotte. Had a nice reverse lob or two, assisted by Tobias Harris, and you saw a little developing chemistry with that pair. But there's just so much that he has to overcome to be a positive impact player with these defensive deficiencies. And you don't love the idea of a playoff series coming down to whether opposing players make wide open 3-pointers. And the Sixers were lucky that Markkanen and then I believe Lamar Stevens missed a combined 3 in a 1-2 minute stretch. So that's a lot of the postseason, but you don't want to be the team conceding most of the wide open threes. You want to hopefully be taking a good amount yourself as well. And the Sixers got by in that game. You felt obviously very good once Joel Embiid checked back in with the score tied. One of those situations where Embiid's not going to let us lose this game, and sure enough, he did not.
Sixers play this weekend back-to-back, get 2 Ws. The vibes are up as opposed to where they were after the Pistons lost in this 3-game losing streak. And I definitely didn't hear anyone chiming in across social media with the doom and gloom when the Phoenix Suns lost to the Memphis Grizzlies down 4 starters, as everyone was crying in their beer about the Sixers losing to the Pistons and how that was going to lead to a first-round exit. So perspective, people. But I think my most uncomfortable moment of the weekend, Noah, was late here on Sunday in the evening when James Harden stepped to the press conference and he sounded like Ben Berry after a long weekend. My boy was banged up, bro. He needed a lozenge or some vitamin C. He was coughing and sniffling. Like, what? Joel didn't sound too good either. Like, last and I kind of preface that by the idea that of this Keith Pompey article that he wrote about them possibly playing Toronto and going to Canada, where Danny Green will finally get his championship ring from 2 years ago, or probably 3 years ago now. But the idea of them going to Toronto and finding out who on the team might be unvaccinated, because obviously Toronto has these restrictions and possibly a first round series with Toronto is still, on the table. So if the Sixers had unvaccinated players, that would obviously be something that could come to a head here. But Pompey's article, talks to George Niang, other guys, and they feel like, and he kind of draws conclusions that it's probably not any of their premium players who would fall into that category. But James sounded banged up, man. I mean, I know you heard him at the press conference. They need to clean that up. Maybe he shouldn't have made the trip to Cleveland after the Charlotte game. But
yeah, again, making a little 2018-19 flashback. Of course, like someone getting sick ended up having a big impact on that series. Joel Embiid with the gastroenteritis,
the bubble guts.
Yeah, you control what you can and hope that the sickness front is a-okay. With the vaccination stuff, we'll potentially learn more here. The Sixers, play in Toronto this week, so that's going to be the first time they will be traveling to Canada since these new mandates. So we shall see, but we'll probably cross that bridge, if and when we get there. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at. I don't want to really
speculate.
Read too much, tea leaves too much, and we'll learn a little more here down the line. Obviously, several key players on the team have confirmed that they're vaccinated and what have you. But I don't think there's any point in going player by player or anything like that. We're analyzing this, until it potentially becomes relevant, and indeed it might. There's the chance that it is Sixers Raptors round 1, and that would obviously be an interesting series for a variety of reasons.
Harden sounded like Ben Berry after a trip to Brazil, man. It was bad. But we'll take a time out here on the Sixers Talk podcast. We'll come back, talk some Tobias Harris, and give him a few props and a tip of the cap, some big ups, and get into this Simmons grievance thing briefly, because we've moved on, right? We've processed that and moved on. We'll be right back. We're brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU Works. We'll be right back.
Start college, build skills, and complete your degree with Wilmington University. 100% online options and affordable tuition makes WilMU work for you. Learn more at wilmu.edu.
Tobias Harris just reads to me like the ultimate professional, man. I mean, a guy who's trying to focus on being great, not getting too high, not getting too low. You know, we saw him kind of getting his petty bag with the Sixers fans when he was trying to egg them on to boo, earlier in the season when he kind of wasn't, what he wanted to be at that time, struggling, trying to reacclimate himself. But he seems to be reacclimated a bit here. We saw him break his season high for three-pointers in a game against the Charlotte Hornets. We saw him steady and solid once again against the Cleveland Cavaliers. He laughed off the Charlotte performance by saying he's a morning guy. And you can definitely see that with his love for pancakes and some of his workouts and whatnot. But you got to give Tobias props, man. I mean, so much ridicule has come his way, and he just continues to try to be the best player he can. And it's starting to pay dividends for the Sixers because he's starting to become a lot more steady in this new role they're asking him to play.
Agreed. I think it seems like he's blending what's comfortable for him and what's required from him that maybe isn't as naturally comfortable, which is great. Last night, I believe he was 0 for 5 from 3, which is obviously not ideal. But hey, the main goal is shooting them when they're available, and he continues to do that. The 8 3-point attempts against Milwaukee was a season high. Then he passed that with 9 against Charlotte. I believe knocked down 5 of those. So that's all super encouraging. And yeah, I looked before the trade. I believe he was around like 2.7 catch and shoot threes per game. And I believe that number is closer to 5 now. So that's a significant jump. And of course, it's consistent with what you see, that the ball is getting swung to him in those situations a lot more. And he's not passing it up, or he's not pump faking and dribbling. Like most of the time he's shooting the ball, and that's what is best for the Sixers. I think the two-way impact potentially continues to be a real X factor of sorts for the Sixers in the playoffs. Just the fact that he does have some switchability, and if a matchup isn't working, the Sixers can turn to him to, be a plan B against a star guard or a star center. And of course, we've seen the situations in the past too, where the Sixers put him on an opposing star big man like Anthony Davis or Karl Anthony Towns, and that allows Joel Embiid to guard a weaker player and be more of a rim protector. So I think these little, versatile qualities that he brings to the table as a defender might be a real asset in the postseason. At least that's the optimistic way to look at it. But his offensive game approach-wise is really solid as of late, and the results are starting to come. He trusted in the process that, taking the right shots would yield the desired results, and that is now the case as of late, with the exception of the off shooting against the Cavs, although, of course, everyone was bricking shots aplenty in the first quarter of that game. I think Harden, Embiid, Harris started to combine like 1 for 16 from the floor. Sixers somehow found a way to win, so that's great. Tobias Harris has been the player that they would like in the postseason for the most part as of late, which is, a big deal heading into the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm loving his defense, and I like I've talked about in previous podcasts, the way he's moving his feet, the way he continues to stay in front of his defenders are definitely a plus. I mean, you mentioned, Harden, Maxey, and Embiid, the way they started the game. Harris and Maxey finished a combined 8 for 25 in this one, and just not what you would think would happen in the game that they would win against a possible Cleveland Cavaliers first-round playoff opponent. So, I am encouraged, like you said, by the Tobias I saw in Charlotte, against Charlotte, and the way he's trying to shoot in rhythm and taking the shots and letting it fly and the things that he's saying, and the self-reflection that lets him know, the self-awareness that lets him know that he's sometimes not living up to expectations or needs to play better and things like that. So, excuse me, I'm encouraged by that. It's funny because we always wonder where the defense will come with Simmons' absence, and it definitely hasn't really come from Maxey. Thibault has stepped up in some regards, but it hasn't been Danny Green, who had been a guy that has been lauded for his defense in the past. And it seems like Tobias has kind of taken on a little bit of that versatility, that interchangeability that you just talked about. So a bit of a surprise to see his defense come along the way it has.
I mean, I will say when they traded for James Harden, that was one of the first things that came to mind with Harris. Is lineups with Harden often like to switch, and Harris has that capacity more than many of the players on this team. So I was somewhat optimistic that he could pull it off, and I think by and large
I didn't think he could get smaller guys. I didn't think that was going to be something he was going to be able to pull off.
Well, yeah, we saw it against Trae Young, when they changed up the coverage in that series. I thought he held his own pretty well there, and that was evidently a big step for him. And even before the Harden trade, there had been one or two instances where he actually wanted to guard smaller players, and Doc Rivers gave him that responsibility, and for the most part, he did okay. I think most matchups he looks, not always dominant, of course, but he looks like he can hold his own. The one exception that comes to mind this year is Kevin Durant, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. Kevin Durant can score whenever he wants against any player. But and against big guys, of course, you see that Tobias Harris is quite physically strong and has also, I think, over the years learned some of the nuances of defending the post in the NBA and not biting on pump fakes and contesting shots without fouling. He does those things pretty well, probably at a slightly above average level, which is a nice asset again for the Sixers in terms of what they can do in the postseason. I think overall, there remain serious defensive question marks here. And part of that is just not settling on, okay, this is the one or two schemes that we do best. There's just been so much experimentation, and you continue to see some examples each game of clear miscommunications or just situations where one or two defenders don't do what is necessary. And of course, that's all that's necessary to lead to an open shot on a 5-man team. One little observation from the Hornets game that I thought was a little encouraging is I noticed Embiid and Harden seem determined to nip issues in the bud right away. So there was a play where Thibault and Harris actually botched a pick and roll coverage and led to 2 free throws for Charlotte. And during the free throws, you saw Harden immediately looking each player in the eyes, yo, what are we doing there? What's supposed to happen on that coverage? And then there was a play where Embiid yelled at Thibault, actually after Embiid caught the ball, about where Thibault was stationed off the ball. Then when those guys went to the timeout, Embiid puts his arm around him. They share a few words, just we don't have much time to figure this stuff out. We're not going to pretend everything's perfect, but hey, if a problem comes up in the game, let's try to fix it right now. I think that's a good approach. The Sixers hope it'll serve them well, but the defense probably is not going to be flawless in the playoffs, and probably effort from folks like Tobias Harris will be the one of the main things the Sixers rely upon to overcome some of the lack of familiarity that's just inevitable on a roster that hasn't been together much here.
Nice to have a last line of defense and a security blanket like Joel Embiid to help solve some of those defensive issues, and particularly offensive ones if they arise, when they arise as well. Let's transition a bit to this. The playoff seeding is something so many people are talking about. Who's in the play-in game, who the Sixers might face in the first round, how to avoid the Brooklyn Nets, who I don't think are as daunting as people want to make them out to be. But with the Brooklyn Nets comes the Ben Simmons discussion, and he has a grievance that has officially been filed to try to recoup the money that he was fined by the 76ers because he thinks that it was unfair and didn't allow him room and the ability to get over his mental health issues in the way that he saw fit and his team saw fit. And Simmons is trying to get his money back, which the Sixers have fined him. They're still fining him with the trade to Brooklyn because the Sixers are still paying part of his salary. And there's the money they're trying to recoup from the prepayment he got before the season started. I hope you're following all that and it made sense. But should we care about this? Should we even be bothered with Josh Harris's money and how Ben Simmons, is or isn't able to recoup that? I mean, should Sixers fans just mentally move on from anything associated with Ben that doesn't have to do with basketball against the 76ers?
Up to you, the individual. I think the way you laid it out is somewhat compelling. That might not be a bad route to take as a fan, to just focus on the team that's about.
I mean, it ain't my money, It ain't.
Yeah. I mean, just like as an NBA story, like it or not, it's significant, and a lot of folks will be watching and curious.
Yes, it definitely casts a shadow toward other players who might find themselves in situations and disagreements with teams. I think that's what you're alluding to.
Perhaps, yeah. I think regardless, like, this was a huge story, and people are wondering how it will end or how this aspect of it will be decided. I think, for me, it's just a reminder of how wild this has been and how much went down. As ESPN reported it, basically the Simmons side, is unhappy that the Sixers wanted a certain amount of information or involvement as far as what he was doing, mental health consultation, treatment, etc. And, the Sixers didn't feel he was providing them sufficient information on that front. That is why they fined him. That's the crux of the disagreement here. But just even looking back on it, you hear, player was fined $20 million, and you think he wasn't around the team at all. And like, as I'm going back through and just, jotting down what happened, like, there were instances where Ben Simmons was like at shoot-arounds and in film sessions that the team didn't even expect him to be at. And there was a lot of strangeness related to just him not being entirely absent from the team. But he was still fine from the team, of course, because there were many other elements of his job that the Sixers felt that he was not, meeting his end of the bargain, right? The most costly and obvious one being he didn't play in any games. He didn't play in over 50 games. The team thought that they should have had more information about the mental health side of this. Simmons camp disagreed. Here we are. And some folks will be watching, but you do not have to watch, I guess is my, you can watch if you'd like.
We have enough issues with the Sixers to worry about, enough going on with this team. The guy they traded for Ben Simmons, James Harden, like, there's enough stuff to worry about with the players that are here. I wish him the best, though. I was a Simmons fan. I don't like the way he handled this situation. I hope he gets help for his mental health stuff. But Noah, I was a Simmons fan. I also was completely unaware that his back was this bad. Like aside from the mental health stuff, something else outlined in that ESPN article is that he received an epidural shot to this herniated disc in his back. And for those of you who have had, children, both of my kids have been delivered by C-section, all three of them. Like, that's not, the epidural is no joke, bro. That is a serious situation. Like, the anesthesiologist has to come in and, there's a prep work. And I'm sure, that wasn't a pleasant experience for him. But I didn't know the back was this bad. And some people had chided him for, using that and milking that as a way to extend his absence from the team and not have to be required to participate in these drills and activities. But it seems like the back is bad, bro. I mean, did you know it was that bad?
Yeah. So just a little story that I think illustrates like this is indeed legit. That bubble season, 2019-20, he hurt the back, and there was some, again, strange murkiness about the timeline and when exactly it happened or it got exacerbated. But Brett Brown told a story. This was in one of our first COVID-era Zooms, that in Milwaukee, I think it was a game maybe in like February of that year, that Ben Simmons was lying on the ground in pain and was like vomiting. And Brett Brown said it was like one of the scariest, like most serious situations he's ever been involved with one of his players. Like there was just a ton of concern that this like very tough, durable guy who, had played almost every game as a Sixer was vomiting from pain for his back injury. So yeah, I guess many folks didn't understand that element of it because, up until this year, up until the knee injury in the bubble, and he had some injuries, but for the most part, he was an every night guy. And Joel Embiid, in contrast, was not. But Simmons has had back problems for a while, and unfortunately, the ramp up process, did not go smoothly, and those issues have returned. And there continues to be mixed messaging about, do they actually think he might return for the playoffs? Is that not realistic? We shall see. This whole thing's been super unpredictable, but just the bottom line is, like the back's legit. He's had back problems for several years, and they're creeping up yet again. And he might not play a game in his age 25 season as a result. But let's hope that's not the case. It sounds like they do hope that he can still return for them and still be yet another X factor in their hope of, going from a low seed, a play-in tournament team, to a deep playoff run.
Yeah, surprising that with the way that you described it and what's been reported with the issues with his back, that wasn't a hiccup in the trade for Harden and Simmons, and that it went down without any issues. So, I mean, I think the Sixers fans in some ways should be thankful because back issues definitely are nothing to play with, particularly on somebody who's such a large human as Ben Simmons. But, we play on and even more reason to worry about your own front porch and not everybody else's. 4 games this week, Noah, the 76ers finishing out the slate, a back-to-back on the tail end of the season. The playoffs are approaching. We will be here with you every step of the way. It looks like Wednesday will be when we will rejoin you with another podcast this week. But we appreciate everyone for listening. For Noah Levick and Ben Barry, I'm Danny Pommells. This has been the Sixers Talk podcast brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU Works. We'll see you next time.